Everyone who's been reviewing the Scream franchise has been saying, hey, what's your favorite horror movie? What are your definitions for horror films? What do you mean by favorite? Do you mean the best, the most influential? Do you mean the one that I like the most? Do you mean the one that I've rewatched the most even though I don't like it that much? What do you mean? Explain yourself! Maybe I should get out more.
No! God, please, no!
Welcome back to Torn Apart, and today we're gonna be looking at Scream. Of course, I'm a huge Scream fan. I probably do a marathon every single year of all the different Scream movies, and I did one last year, of course, as well. I will say it here, the Scream franchise, in my opinion, is one of the most consistently good horror franchises of all time, no question asked. So my review of this film will come not only from a fan perspective of the franchise itself, but also as a horror fan. So of course I have two different sets of expectations when it comes to this film here.
Hello, Sydney. It's an honor.
Long story short, I think that Scream 5 is actually a really good film, and I think that Wes Craven would have been really proud of it. I feel like the meta commentary works really well, and for me the most important thing when it comes to remaking a new film in the Scream franchise is answering the question, do we need it? Why are we even here? Do we have any new things to add when it comes to the contemporary horror genre, and what can we critique about it? And I feel like that this film answers those questions quite successfully. So this film is actually a requel, so it is a reboot slash sequel at the same time. If you think about what Halloween has been doing the last couple of years, even if you think about the new Star Wars trilogy, and it's kind of like when people want to modernize a franchise without losing the fan base too much. They want to introduce a new set of teenagers, a new set of characters, a new version of the city of Woodsbury. The legacy characters are gonna be coming back. I actually really loved how they brought the conversation back into elevated horror. So the films that get name dropped, for example, would be Jordan Peele's Get Out, would be Midsommar, it would be Hereditary, it would be films like It Comes at Night or even It Follows, which is something that of course we didn't really have in 2011, so the last time that we were in Woodsbury for Scream 4. And it was an interesting conversation because when it comes to elevated horror, it has kind of split the fandom into two different categories. There are the hardcore horror fans who are fans of stuff that was going on in the 80s, and then we have a new audience which is maybe not necessarily coming to this from a horror fan perspective, but they love the elevated horror films just because of all the themes that get addressed into those ones, and it just feels like a good movie first and a horror movie second.
That was intense.
Of course, Wes Craven passed away not long ago, so this film is actually not directed by him, but it is directed by the same person who was behind the slasher movie Ready or Not.
What the fuck is wrong with you? You fucking animal, you piece of shit, little tiny dick licker fucking asshole fucking eye!
Now let's go deep into the narrative of Scream 5 and talk about the good stuff, and then we'll head into the bad stuff. Of course, now this is gonna be your spoiler warning because I will be addressing a lot of the narrative things that go on in the film itself. First of all, it's bloody, it's fun, and honestly, I didn't look at my watch a single time because I was just having a really good time. So first of all, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd because I just really enjoyed it. And actually, if you stick until the end of the video, you will get to see my official ranking of the entire Scream franchise. Stay tuned for that as well.
There'll be more news about the magical new releases from Disney Video coming up after the film.
The gore in this film is actually quite impressive, so all the different kills, they felt very memorable, and I really liked all the tension that was building up in all those different scenes. I really like the fact that one of the main characters, so Sam, it is actually revealed that she is Billy Loomis' daughter. Billy Loomis was the killer from the original Scream movie, and that she actually has weird visions. I was actually really surprised to see Skeet Ulrich come back to the role. It's incredible how he looks exactly the same. He hasn't changed a single thing about his face, but he still has that kind of intensity in his eyes that he had in the first film. So I really enjoyed his performance, of course, and I thought it was an interesting way of bringing up the past. A lot more interesting than what it did in Scream 3, where Sidney was having those weird visions of her dead mother and it was turning into a weird camp ghostly movie.
You're poison. You're just like me. You're just like me. It's a mental breakdown.
There are a lot of iconic moments in Scream 5. I actually really enjoyed Dewey's death because of course Dewey dies and he's a bit of a tragic character. I was actually quite impressed of how much I related to him, how much I realized that I liked him from all the previous films, and I was actually expecting him to die in Scream 4, but I'm actually glad that it came here because if you look at Dewey, if you look at his life, it feels like his life is not going nowhere and he spent his entire life basically fighting different Ghostface killers and he's linked to Woodsbury and he's not able to move on with his life.
There's certain rules to surviving. Believe me, I know. They always come back.
So it is tragic that he dies, but at the same time it feels like this was his moment to just let go of everything, let go of all the different investigations, let go of all the different killings and the awful things that he's lived in that town, and in some way kind of felt really peaceful, and it was really a beautiful scene, and Ghostface saying that iconic line of "was an honor," just a beautiful scene. And it didn't feel cheap at all. I also felt like it was a good idea to kill Dewey instead of killing Gail. We don't really have a lot of emotional attachment towards her. They couldn't really kill Sidney as well because I feel like Sidney is kind of like the perfect version of the final girl. I actually really like that they show the fact that she's managed to build a normal life outside of the Woodsbury killings. She has children, she's married as well. And that is something that is quite nice, you know, because for example, if you compare that to Halloween and the fact that Laurie Strode has been living in trauma for her entire life, if you think about the last Terminator film as well, I just find it really weird that Hollywood seems to think that 10, 20, 30 years later, people are still reliving the trauma every single day and that there are no other positive things going on in their lives. So it felt quite refreshing to see that Sidney actually managed to build a cool and pleasant life.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Not in my movie.
I also like the fact that they didn't try to modernize it too much and make it look like a Gen Z version of Scream and of Ghostface, like trying to put in way too many weird technologies, for example. It is still quite straightforward. Ghostface comes at you and stabs you, he using the voice modifier to modify his voice, and I like that consistency because if you look at other horror franchises like Child's Play, when they try to modernize it and they turn the Chucky into an AI doll, it was incredibly stupid and cringy.
Oh, fuck.
I don't want to see those kind of weird modernizations that don't really have an impact on the franchise itself. I also really like the credits of the film, of course, which are a huge homage to Wes Craven, and of course even the film is dedicated to him at the very end. I honestly really like the final act and the whole idea of kind of like tying up the bow when it comes to Sidney Prescott's life as a final girl, because the final act actually takes place at Stu Macher's house like in the first Scream movie.
You ready for this? Never.
Oh, stop. Wait.
I also like the fact that the two killers, because of course it is two killers, so it's Richie and Amber. I really like the fact that they have very different energies about them. So Richie, for example, is more calculating. He's the man with the plan, so he tends to take his time when it comes to the killings. I'm pretty sure that he's the one who kills Wes in that brutal stabbing through the neck slow motion. And I'm pretty sure, for example, that Amber killed Dewey because she's a really energetic killer who is very enthusiastic about what she's doing, and she just keeps stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and stabbing until the person is not only dead but like super dead.
These sequels don't know when to stop. They just keep recycling the same shit. Even the opening scene, there's always some random girl who gets a call that undoubtedly ends up getting her killed. It's also predictable. There's no element of surprise. You can see everything coming.
Did that surprise you?
I just like those tiny little details which will definitely pay off on rewatches. I also really like the fact that Sam almost really embraces her Billy Loomis psychopathy at the end of the film, and she ends up like stabbing 100 times her ex-boyfriend in the final act of the film. But I also feel like they could have turned that moment into a very tragic and emotionally impactful moment if any of the other characters actually witnessed her passion when it came to murdering him. Can you imagine, for example, that scene if they turned the camera and showed that her sister was actually behind her looking at her with all the blood going down her face and her feeling this kind of killing euphoria? I don't know. I kind of feel like that the whole idea of introducing the fact that she suffers from schizophrenia and that she's afraid of becoming exactly like her father, Billy Loomis, it wasn't really exploited that much. It is possibly something that is interesting, that could become something interesting in the next few films if they decided to make a sequel. But yeah, I feel like there is some small things that could have been improved, and that's why we're gonna go into the bad slash mediocre stuff. These of course are gonna be really nitpicky things. As I said before, I'm a Scream mega fan. Like, one thing that really bothers me is that Tara, so Sam's sister, is not our final girl. She survives being stabbed like 7 times and she gets her ankle broken as well. She goes back to the hospital and then once again she gets attacked by Ghostface, and to see her pain as she tries to get on the wheelchair and escape really slowly from Ghostface, who is just behind her being like, what are you even trying to do, you know? Just how relentless it was and how much of a final girl she felt. She was definitely more interesting and she definitely suffered a lot more, which is kind of like what we require from a final girl in a slasher movie.
Doors unlocked.
Jenna Ortega is just a really good actress, and I feel like it definitely was not the case for the actress who was playing Sam. I've actually had a look at a lot of different reviews, whether it is mega fans of Scream or casual fans of Scream. Everyone really enjoyed how the legacy characters were used in this film, and I actually didn't. Mostly Courtney Cox. I don't know if this has really to do with her performance. I don't know if we can judge her for that, but her face, she has undergone so much plastic surgery that she looked like a Barbie doll for the entire film.
I choose the ugly, I chose the fringe, the bangs.
Back in 2011, it was already quite weird, but today it really feels like she's not able to emote a single thing from her face. When she was crying over Dewey's death, I didn't believe anything that she was saying, and it was just really weird. When I was looking at Gail, it felt like her face was stuck in this, like something like this, and she was trying to emote at the same time, you know, and it was just like her face, my face is stuck like this, and then you see tears coming out of your eyes, but the face is still stuck like this, and it's just like, oh no. Yeah, I feel like this was the first film where the film didn't need them necessarily. They could have made the entire film just with Dewey. They were not useful at all in the final act, for example. And honestly, like, try and look at their faces when Richie is doing his monologue, and when also Amber is revealing the fact that they're both the Ghostface killers, they literally couldn't give a shit. It is very obvious that they don't give a shit. And I don't know if it's because they're doing it on purpose from a performance standpoint, because they've heard these kind of speeches like 4 times in a row literally, and they just don't give a fuck about serial killers explaining their motive, or whether they just didn't know what to do because they had no purpose being there. And I also feel like the Dewey felt like a well-rounded, emotionally empathetic person just because that he looked his age. He looked like he actually grew up, he actually aged from one film to the next, while the 2 other characters, they just looked like very Hollywood glamorized versions of themselves, and I just found it incredibly weird and creepy. Compare, for example, Sidney Prescott and Laurie Strode, even though they're not probably the same age, and you'll know exactly what I mean. It just completely takes me out of the movie. Of course, you can't really judge people for wanting to stay beautiful forever if they have the money to do it, but at the same time, just like me as an audience, me as a Scream fan, me who has to lose himself in the narrative of the film, just looking at their perfect Barbie faces just completely took me out. It was a bit of a shame also the fact that we almost spent too much time with Sam and Richie driving from one crime scene to the next. I really felt that this Scream movie was trying to do both at the same time. It was kind of trying to show a new generations of people in Woodsbury and how they were living their lives, but at the same time trying to fit in as many old people as possible. But I mean, if you compare all the different activities that were going on, for example, in the first few Scream movies, there is almost no high school going on, there are no classes, there are no iconic like going to the football match, there is only one party at the very end of the film. I mean, they don't really give these teenagers a lot of things to do, and it just felt really weird and kind of not realistic at all, even though I actually liked most of the characters. It's just that they didn't give them enough things to do so that they looked like actual teenagers. It just felt like they were there most of the times to point at each other and being like, what if you're the killer, or maybe you're the killer, you're being really suspicious right now, you're probably the killer. Are you going downstairs by yourself? If you're going by yourself, if you're not scared, you're probably the killer. It just felt really weird. If you think about it, like if you have a strong group of friends, you wouldn't spend so much time pointing fingers at each other and accusing each other of being murderers. If you actually believe that some of them were murderers, you would just avoid them, right? But this never happens in the entire film. So this is kind of when the meta commentary, almost like the screenwriters shoot themselves on the foot here, because they shoved in so many different winks at the audience that at the end of the day it just didn't feel really realistic at times. The final act, for example, where literally all the main characters are here at this party, even though they know that Ghostface has been killing so many different people, why would you go to a party and still point fingers at people being like, what if you are the killer? Why don't you just fuck off? Why don't you just stay at home instead of going to the party if you're going there to just point fingers at your friends and suspect other people? If you stayed at home, maybe it would have been fine. Instead of just pointing fingers at each other, why don't you do something more drastic? I mean, if some of your friends were being murdered right in front of you and you were suspected actually someone was doing it, wouldn't you be mad at them? Wouldn't you like kind of react? Can you like punch them or like insult them? Or I don't know, like I kind of felt like they were trying to recreate that kind of anxiety that was going on in the first film.
I'll be right back.
He's dead.
And also this is probably why the film ended up not having that many emotional stakes for me. For example, there was only like a couple of characters that I really cared about and I didn't want them to see die. But at the same time, I was just like, it's a Ghostface murder scene. Anyone can die, but I don't really care who. Also, like, this is the moment where I realized that this movie is also about generational trauma in the way that the copycat Ghostface killers are literally slaughtering all the different family members related to the main characters of the film, of the first film. And I was there being like, but that's such a traumatizing thing. Why is no one talking about it? Why isn't there like a single character who is just like, this is not fair? Why are we getting punished for the crimes of our parents? Why are we getting punished just for living in Woodsbury, there was never that kind of emotional recognition of the fact that these killings are just so unfair in comparison to all the other ones. This is something, for example, that Halloween in the new trilogy is doing quite right, and it kind of feels like Michael Myers has been destroying the city from within for generations and generations, and that everyone has suffered for it. It could have been good if they got some of that generational trauma and they put it into this movie here, because right now it kind of feels like there is only the meta commentary and the fun and the gore, but it is missing that emotional point which I really wanted, to be honest. This is the 5th film in the franchise, and if you end up not caring about who dies and who doesn't, I feel like it's a problem, right? At the end of the day, I kind of feel like the whole idea of giving source material for the directors of Stab 9, 10, 11 is actually interesting from a meta commentary perspective, but it didn't feel as emotionally impactful as other Ghostface killers of the past.
Surprise, Sydney.
I feel like the best killers' motivations are the ones that are personal. I feel like that this film really didn't manage to make us understand why these two people at a personal level they cared about recreating these Ghostface murders. If you think back to Scream 4, for example, the main villain in that one was played by Emma Roberts.
Do you know what it was like growing up in this family? Related to you? I mean, all I ever heard was Sydney this and Sydney that and Sydney, Sydney, Sydney. You were always just so fucking special! Well, now I'm the special one.
And at the end of the film, she says that she basically wanted to become a celebrity, she wanted to become a star like Sydney. But this is not the only motivation. She actually says that she was tired of living in the shadow of Sydney Prescott because she was her cousin, and that's really relatable. Think about if in a particular family, for example, in your family, there is someone who is always been more famous than everyone else, more successful, they do nothing wrong, and the family keeps bringing you up in conversation after conversation after conversation, and you have to sit there and be like, yeah, but what about my accomplishments? What about what I have done as well and the harsh things that I had to live through? Are they worth nothing in comparison to this guy who's just this god figure to the family? So that's why it was relatable, and it was always the same thing when it comes to all the different Ghostface killers. It was always personal and relatable. I feel like this was the first time where it was not really personal, it was just meta, it was just fun. They didn't really have a personal connection to the town itself, and they didn't have a personal connection to the legacy characters either. At the end of the day, you have to remember that these are nitpicks, these are small details, they're not really destroying the movie from a structural point of view. I think that I feel about Scream 5 the same way that I felt about Matrix Resurrections, in the way that it is gonna be a film that is interesting to talk about among fans and among other people, and it's always gonna be interesting to discuss when it comes to the way that you can re-energize an old franchise in a good way. What is next when it comes to the Scream franchise? I think we have a couple of different directions that we can go in. Of course, we could once again do another film with the legacy characters being put on the side and just becoming kind of mentors and not participating in the action anymore. I would actually like that. We could explore the idea of not being in Woodsbury anymore, since Tara and Sam, who are the final girls of this film here, they don't want to live in Woodsbury anymore. They want to go as far as possible. So it would be an interesting thing to see how they would manage to make some kind of meta commentary about not being in Woodsbury anymore and not being linked to maybe the original killers. I think it could be interesting if you really go deep into what it feels like for Sam, psychologically speaking, to have those visions of Billy Loomis. I would actually really like to finally see a final girl becoming the Ghostface killer. I know there have been so many different theories about how it would be so cool if Gail or Sydney at some point, just for some kind of reason, took on the mask of Ghostface for revenge or other purposes, I feel like it would have been the perfect stepping stone and final film in the Scream franchise. I would also really like maybe a film where Ghostface actually wins, because if you think about it, I think that the Scream franchise is one of the only horror slasher franchise where the killer almost never wins. They're never in prison, they're always killed by the end of each film. Let's jump into my final ranking of the Scream movie, starting with the one and only Scream. This is the best Scream movie, of course. So many incredible things going on here. Every single time I watch this beautiful masterpiece, I keep coming up with new ways of interpreting different things. For example, the last time that I watched it, I was looking specifically for gender dynamics and the way in which it's really interesting how Billy is desperately trying to sleep with Sydney and she's refusing, because by horror conventions, if you are a virgin, you are safe from being killed by the serial killer. The next one on my list is gonna be Scream 4. I absolutely love Scream 4. Emma Roberts, incredible. That final act is so good. There are actually 2 final acts in that movie, if you remember correctly, and this is among the best Scream movies, also because of the intro scene, which is kind of a meta commentary on the Stab movies. My third position is gonna be Scream 2. Once again, really good intro scene taking place at the theater. It is so terrifying to see all the fans being so hyped about seeing the movie and almost cheering as this woman is just bleeding out and dying on stage. It was just incredibly well performed and I really love that introduction scene. I put this down here just because I find always that the third act, the final act, when you get to reveal who Ghostface actually is, feels really weird because it is taking place at the big theater. It is a big open space, so it doesn't feel as claustrophobic, it doesn't feel as scary as being in a house, and that is basically the only reason, because otherwise I feel like there are a lot of really strong connections to the first film, and this is the film where actually Sydney gets to transform and become a really strong final girl. I also enjoyed, for example, the way in which Cotton, who is played by Liev Schreiber, is being reintroduced in the plot of this film, and it actually makes a lot of sense that he could be Ghostface. And I like the fact every single time I'm always surprised by his performance and by the reveal that he's not actually the killer, and this goes on from the very beginning of the film to the very last minute. And of course, here right under Scream 2, I'm gonna put Scream 5 for the reasons that I said before. I think there are a lot of things that could have been fixed from a narrative perspective if they decided to tone down the meta commentary a bit and focus more on emotional attachment to the different characters. At the very bottom of my list, I'm gonna put Scream 3. Scream 3 is of course one of the least liked movies in the franchise for a very good reason. When I'm trying to describe Scream 3, I'm always like, Scream 3 basically has a mediocre first and second act and an interesting plot twist at the very end.
Roman Bridger being Maureen's long-lost son, Sydney's brother in Scream 3. I'm gonna go with Roman Bridger because it was kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was like the weirdest.
Yeah.
While, for example, Scream 2 is the opposite and has a really strong first and second act, but has a very underwhelming ending, as we said before. Scream 3 is taking place on the movie set of Stab, and just it looks incredibly weird with the fact that they have built sets of Woodsboro and of different houses. I hate the fact that Sydney is having visions of her dead mother, which is something that is not canon at all across all the different films. And I really hate the fact that also this is the first time that they introduced the fact that Ghostface can reproduce exactly the voices of any character in the Stab movie itself, because they have the recordings of their voices, so he was able to actually do something stupid like that. I just really didn't like it. But that is basically it when it comes to my official ranking of the Scream franchise. Let me know in the comments what your official ranking is, what you thought also of the new Scream movie, and if you think that it should actually keep going with the franchise. I honestly think maybe yes, but not right now, maybe in like 5 years or 10 years or something like that. Don't forget to like and subscribe because it always helps. Every single like that you drop is gonna be another stab into Richie's stomach, so keep stabbing until he fucking disappears. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Beware of illegal video cassettes. Check whether this video cassette carries a genuine label hologram. Video piracy is a crime. Do not accept it. Demand a genuine cassette from your video store.
Hello.